Hello, I know the lighting is really terrible. It is only 6:45 p.m. here in Ho Chi Minh City, but it's still springtime, like turning into summer, so it still gets dark pretty early, and the light in this room is literally there, and then I've turned my bedside light on, so if I turn that off, there's no light at all. Well, you can still kind of see me, but it's not as good. Okay, so today was my first full day in Ho Chi Minh City, formerly known as Saigon in Vietnam, and I did two big things today. I went to the War Remnants Museum and the Independence Palace. So the War Remnants Museum was really lovely. I didn't take any photographs or videos while I was in there. I personally just felt a bit weird taking pictures of the images, which were really graphic and heart-wrenching, so I just didn't feel comfortable. I just didn't feel comfortable, so I just absorbed everything, which I really enjoyed. So I wanted to talk about the War Remnants Museum. As an American, as someone educated in the American education system, I learned about the Vietnam War when I was in high school and stuff, but obviously we learned it from the American perspective, whereas in Vietnam they actually call it the US aggression. So the whole museum has a very different spin on it than, let's say, an American museum on the Vietnam War would have, which is really interesting to see as an American and as someone that was educated in the American system. To kind of see those differences was really fascinating. It's also fascinating to look at, you know, what do Americans leave out of it, but what do the Vietnamese leave out of it as well. It was really interesting. So they have a whole exhibit dedicated to the fact that there were lots of protests going on around the world against the Vietnam War. They really focus on that and kind of use that as to say, look, the world was on our side. They talk about protests in the United States, Europe, all over the world. So that's really fascinating, really cool. They also talk about the prisoners of war that were kept. Very famously, John McCain was a president of war, so they have a whole little panel on him, and they talk about him, and they talk about how the prisoners of war were very well treated by the Vietnamese, and etc., which I think is interesting, because I don't think prisoners of war are probably ever very well treated because they're a prisoner of war, but they really make it sound like these men who were kept, you know, against their will, enjoyed and loved their time, which is interesting. You know, I don't know these people personally, but I can't imagine that it's very fun to be kept captive for years, no matter what's going on. So it was just kind of interesting to see that perspective, and to read that. And then I didn't know that one of the ambassadors to Vietnam from the United States was one of those prisoners of war, so I think that's really interesting because he apparently during his time really absorbed Vietnamese culture. He ended up marrying a Vietnamese Australian woman, so clearly for him it was a very different experience than, let's say, John McCain, who writes about it quite harshly, right? Very famously had nerve damage from his time there. So just interesting to see kind of their perspective on prisoners of war. But then also they talk about things that I know I was never taught really in history class. They talk about Agent Orange quite a bit, which for those of you who are not familiar, the United States did use biological warfare during the Vietnam War, and so they used, you know, phosphorus gas bombs and napalm and that kind of thing, and so they have two full exhibits actually dedicated to Agent Orange, which I actually couldn't stay in for very long. The first one, you know, it just kind of, it gets worse as you go, and towards the end I really couldn't bear to look at the images. It was very upsetting to me because they're showing you these really kind of graphic pictures and photographs of the children and people affected by Agent Orange, because these, you know, gases and chemicals have gotten into the earth and have affected people. So even people that weren't alive are still being born with defects because of these chemicals. So it's really horrific, and some of them, you know, it sounds terrible to say, but look a little kind of frightening just because they are severely deformed. And it's very sad, and so it really, and they're very graphic photographs, so I really, I kind of skimmed and I did the reading, and then I said, okay, I was starting to get very emotional and tear up, so I had to excuse myself from that particular area. But connected to that was actually, there's an organization that raises money for people affected by that, and so they had like art and things that people who had been affected had made that you could purchase. So I thought that was really nice. And then there was another like half of a section, half of a gallery filled with photographs, and those were really cool. And in that section, they also talked about American soldiers whose families were then later affected because they had been exposed to Agent Orange. So, you know, they fly back to the United States, they've been exposed to these chemicals, they have children with their partners, and their children were also affected. So I did like that even though we were in Vietnam, they did expand and they said, look, this terrible thing affected them too, which I thought was really interesting and good, because I feel like I don't know if an American museum would do that. If, you know, things were switched and they had done that to us, I don't know if they would have then been like, look, it negatively impacted them as well. That was the War Remnants Museum. It was really beautiful. I highly recommend going. It was really, really cheap as well. It was only 40,000 dong, which is about $1.75 US, $2.45 Australian. So really, really cheap. So definitely worth checking out. Then we move on to Independence Palace, which was absolutely gorgeous, really beautiful. And so that is the palace. It was originally occupied by, so Vietnam originally was occupied by the French, and so there's a lot of French influence in the palace, really gorgeous, and originally occupied by a French person, not a king, but like by a Frenchman. And then the president of South Vietnam, well, president of Vietnam, later South Vietnam, lived in that palace, and that's where they were trying to, you know, stop the Viet Cong. And so really cool to see that, and we got to see all of the different rooms, from the extravagant, you know, dining rooms and etc. to the bunker, which is in the basement. Really, really beautiful. I highly recommend going to that as well. Also only 40,000 dong, so $1.75 just about. So yeah, that's been my first day. It's very, very hot and humid, and I was not expecting that. So you're not allowed to drink the tap water here in Vietnam, or I was recommended not to drink it, so I've been chugging bottled water, which is, you know, kind of annoying. I don't like having to like, I don't like having to buy plastic bottles every time I want water, but I also really don't want to get sick. So I'm just gonna have to apologize to the environment and just, yeah, I'm sorry. So yeah, I've been doing that. I booked a, tomorrow I am doing the Chu Chi tunnels, which were part of the network to capture the Viet Cong, from my understanding, but I'm doing a tour tomorrow, so I'm hoping to film a lot of it and kind of get more information, because honestly I don't know that much about it, but it was kind of one of those things that people said, if you're going to Ho Chi Minh City, you have to do it, so I'm doing it. And then on Sunday, I am taking a bus to Dalat, which was not on my original itinerary at all, but then my friend Bradley said that I had to go, and I consulted with my friend Ryan earlier today actually, and he said, yeah, Dalat is awesome, you should definitely go. And I did some Googling, and it's known for being eternally springtime, so it's supposed to be really beautiful. I'm really excited, so I'm gonna go there on Sunday. It's about a 6-hour bus ride, so that's not terrible. And then I'll make my way up either to Hoi An or maybe make another stop on the way. Anyway, so that's been my first full day in Vietnam. Thank you so much for watching. Bye guys.